So, so it's recording now. And I am
Okay, if we are recording, it's 6:03. I will intro, so 6:05, the professor will be joining us with his words. So welcome everybody to our Mifgash. Mifgash in Hebrew means encounter. That's what we call this series of meetings, Mifgashim. We had one with Don Francisco and the head of the museum in Buchenwald. We will have one next Monday also in English, as we will have a virtual tour to the Buenos Aires Holocaust Museum, something brand new, which I will encourage you to sign up after this activity. And today we have the luxury to have an expert in many, many topics, but especially in the one I asked him, and he immediately said yes. And he's one of us, but he's also invited in many universities all over the world. I'm talking about our own Dr. Hugo Erwitz. Dr. Erwitz has a BA in economics from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, a master's degree in management from Imperial College in London, an MA in economics and Latin American studies from the University of Pittsburgh, and a PhD in economics from Indiana University. He has been a visiting professor in the Monterrey Institute of Technology in Mexico, at the Ramon Llull University in Barcelona, at the Fachhochschule Kaufsen in Austria, and at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. He has extensive consulting experience in the US, Europe, and Latin America, has served as economics commentator for CNN in Spanish. He has pioneered in the concept of measuring and developing a student's international IQ, and is the author of the groundbreaking international knowledge assessment test, ICAT, which quantifies the level of international IQ. If you are still not impressed, like I am, let me tell you, which is obvious, he's born in Argentina. Dr. Erwitz loves to travel and has a passion for learning foreign languages. Listen to this one. He's fluent in English, in Spanish, in French, in Italian, and Hebrew, proficient in German and Portuguese, and has basic conversational knowledge in Arabic, Greek, Russian, and Yiddish. And he has time for us too. So, no further note, let me just tell you that you need to be a genius to understand Israeli politics. Don't Israelis even understand themselves? That's why we are an expert. Like he said before, he will speak for 45 minutes, 10 minutes for question. At 7, we go to Minyan. And if you want to stay in the Zoom, you will be able to. So, Dr. Erwitz, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rabbi Roisman. That was a very kind introduction. I am very pleased to once again have an opportunity to share with you my perspectives on Israel and the Middle East. In fact, today's lecture, today's presentation will be 2 lectures in one. I agree that the main part will be devoted to the Israeli elections, trying to understand the Israeli political system. But in the second part, we will also deal with what's happening in the Middle East in general. There's a lot of transformations and a warming up of relationships between Israel and a number of Arab countries. So there, and of course, the ongoing threat from Iran. So there's a lot to talk about also about the Middle East. So we have a lot of materials, but we will deal with Israel in the first part of my presentation. Okay. Once again, please mute your microphones. Actually, I will mute them all for now. And I'm going to share my screen because we're going to start. I'm going to put up my PowerPoint. So bear with me for a minute. Okay, and now we want the presentation mode. Okay, so that should be working now. All right, let's go. The title of my presentation today is the upcoming Israeli elections and the new geopolitics of the Middle East, looking at the emerging strategies of Biden, Putin, Erdogan, MBS in Saudi Arabia, and the whole Iranian question. A little bit about myself. Rabbi already introduced me. I was born in Argentina, and I've been a professor of economics and international business in South Florida for many years. And I've been involved actively with study abroad programs. I am the director of a study abroad company called Forum Nexus Study Abroad, which specializes in academic programs in Europe, in several European countries for students from the US and also from other countries. In my endeavors as professor of international issues, I have championed the concept that everybody should develop their international IQ. And by that, I mean your level of knowledge and familiarity with what's going on in the world, what's, countries, blocks of countries, conflicts, peace treaties, European Union. So there is a lot going on. And sometimes it's very easy to say, no, that's too complicated. It's too much for me. And for example, you can say it's too complicated about understanding the Israeli system. But no, I'm not going to let you say that's too complicated. We're going to deal with it together, and you will see that it's not that bad. Okay, let's move on. Now, I'm supposed to talk about the Israeli political system, but I will start with something else. That's a surprise for you. Let's spend 5 minutes focusing on something else. Like what? I just want to do a 5-minute review of how is Israel doing as a nation in the last 50 or 60 years. Why? Because we are too caught up into the short term. What's happening this month? What happened during the last year? What's going to happen next week? But this is Israel, and we love Israel, and we are proud of Israel. So just for the record, just to keep our perspective, let's do a quick review. Okay, so there is a long list. I will just go over it very quickly. Israel has managed to receive millions of Jewish immigrants from all over the world. It developed technologies for the desert. It was an early adopter of solar energy. It became a world leader in dairy technology. This is 50 years ago already. It implemented an extensive program of technical assistance to developing nations. It sends emergency teams whenever there is an earthquake or a national disaster. It has a sophisticated pharmaceutical industry. It has had one for several decades. It has become a world leader in desalination technologies. And there's more. 50 years ago already, IBM and Intel set up research and development centers in Israel. Israel developed from scratch a world-class military and space industry. Cultural issues. Israel is a frequent winner in the yearly Eurovision Song Contest. Israel has become a leading center for high-tech innovation and startups. 12 Israelis have won Nobel Prizes in literature, in science, in economics, and in peace. Israel is a leader in biomedical research and nanotechnology. Israeli universities, one of which I had the privilege of graduating from, are considered world-class institutions, truly remarkable institutions conducting cutting-edge research. And more recently, Israel has become a leader in the COVID vaccination programs. Wow, so that's a lot. So in summary, Israel has evolved from a struggling developing country into a successful industrialized nation, actually into one of the most creative and innovative countries in the world. How did all that happen? So why exactly did I choose to start the lecture highlighting Israel's numerous achievements, you might wonder? I just wanted to put things into a proper perspective, because before we dive into the nitty-gritty of its political system. So there is an expression in English which is getting into the sausage making. You want to enjoy a sausage, you don't really want to get into the details of how the sausage is made. Okay, so there are a number of frustrating elements in the Israeli political system. So I found it important to start the lecture reminding ourselves that there is so much that Israel has achieved in just a few decades of independence. Okay, now we can move on. Now, I have a question for all of you, all right? Stay with me here. What emotion or sensation do you experience each time that you hear news about the political system in Israel? Well, don't worry. You no need to tell me. I know what you're going to say. I will answer the question for you. Bewilderment. That's what you experience. You are bewildered. So what is bewilderment? Let's look at the definition. A feeling of being perplexed and confused. Confusion resulting from failure to understand. Okay, some of you are not native English speakers, so I will translate it into Spanish. Desconcierto, perplejidad. So if you are bewildered, you want to scream, what on earth is going on in Israel? And you look like this, or maybe like this, or like this. What's going on? Right? And you ask yourself, another election in Israel? Haven't they just had 3 in the last 2 years? And in your head, you have a huge mishmash. Bibi, Gantz, Lapid, Bennett, Saar, Labor, Meretz, Yesh Atid, Arab parties, Haredim, Yamina. Please stop, stop, too much. So, if you feel bewildered, welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we will try to explain how the electoral system in Israel works, what has happened in the last 2 years, what happened in the April 2020 election, that is the last one, a year ago. Lots of things have changed in the last year. So, and what are the predicted outcomes for next week's elections? But that's not all, because in the second part of the presentation, we will also take a look at the changes taking place in the Middle East, and we will try to discuss, hopefully if we have time, what's happening with Iran, with Turkey, with Saudi Arabia, with Russia, with the Emirates, with Syria, with Lebanon, with Iraq, Sudan, Egypt, Qatar, and Bahrain. So are you convinced now that we have a lot of materials ahead? So let's do it. Let's start. Okay. So the basics about the Israeli electoral system. The head of government is the prime minister, not the president. The current prime minister, as you know, is Benjamin Netanyahu, who goes by Bibi. He's the leader of the Likud party, which is a right-wing party. The role of president is mostly ceremonial, except for one duty related to the elections that we will touch upon in a minute. The current president is Reuven Rivlin, who is nicknamed Ruvi Rivlin, an established politician who has become a distinguished political figure trying to stay above the mudslinging of the Israeli politics. He grew up in the Likud, in the same party as Netanyahu, but he evolved into more of a statesman these days. Israel is a parliamentary democracy. So the Israeli parliament is called the Knesset, and it has 120 seats. Now, math. In this presentation, we will do a lot of math about how many seats it takes to have a majority. So the number 120 is going to be important, and the number 61 is going to be important because that is how you achieve a simple majority. So in order to have the simple majority, you need 61 votes. Voters vote for a party, not for an individual candidate. So the pro-Bibi voters do not vote for Bibi, they vote for the Likud, Bibi's party. Okay, so we will review how the system works by referring to the last election, the elections of April 2020. All right, we will come back to this slide. But before that, I want to give you details. Okay, now, right after the results are known, okay, so you have elections for the different parties. One party, so let's go back to the slide. So for example, these were the results of the April 2020 elections. Likud earned 36 seats in the Knesset, and Blue and White, which was the main opposition party led by Gantz, had 33 seats in the Knesset. Other parties had 16 seats, 6 seats, 7 seats, 15 seats. So the negotiations start. In order to form a coalition, you need a coalition of at least 61 MKs. MKs is the abbreviation of Knesset members, members of parliament. Okay, so the president is the president, Rivlin, the one who has a mostly ceremonial task. He assigns the task of forming a coalition to the leader of the party most likely to succeed and gives him or her about 3 weeks to do so. Now, there used to be a presumption that the leader of the party, the largest party, will get the job to put together the government, but no, is the leader of the party most likely to succeed. So then the tough negotiations start. Now, if that party leader fails within the time allotted, then the president gives a chance to the leader of the other bloc. If he or she also fails, the Knesset is disbanded and new elections have to be scheduled. So that's why we have had so many elections in the last 2 years, and we'll say more about that in a minute. Now, this is very important. In Israel, as in all parliamentary democracies, there is a minimum for a small party to qualify to enter the Knesset. That is called a threshold. The threshold in Israel these days is 3.25%. 3.25% of 120 seats in the Knesset, that's equivalent to 4 seats. That means that if a party earns enough votes to make it almost to 4 seats, let's say to 3 seats or to 3.5 seats, those votes get wasted. So they do not count. And that's part of the dramas of the Israeli electoral system. Now, why do I have a map of Israel here now at this point? This is to remind you about who votes and who doesn't vote in Israel. So a reminder of Israeli geography. This is the West Bank. The dark yellow is what's considered Israel proper. The West Bank is the territories, is part of the West Bank, Gaza, and the Golan Heights, where the territories annexed to Israel or captured by Israel after the 1967 war, the 6 Days War. In the meantime, Gaza was, Israel exited Gaza. It still has some kind of controls, but Gaza is run by the Palestinian, by Hamas, by Palestinian government. The West Bank has some kind of autonomy, but is pretty much under the control of Israel. And when you hear discussion about the settlements in the West Bank, so all over the West Bank, there's a number of Jewish settlements so that the Jewish population, so the West Bank, which used to be all Arab population, is now, has a lot of Jewish population in the settlements. But why am I mentioning it? My main point at this stage in our presentation is to make a distinction between Arab individuals from the West Bank and Arab citizens of the State of Israel. Arab citizens of the State of Israel make up 20% of the population of Israel. And they are normal citizens. They vote, they are citizens with equal rights like everybody else. Okay, so when we talk about the Arab parties and the vote of the Arab parties in Israel, we refer to parties that are the preferred parties of the Arab citizens of the State of Israel. That has nothing to do with the Arab population of the West Bank, for example, because they are not citizens of the state. What will be their future? Will they become citizens? That depends whether there will be a one-state solution or a two-state solution. And we're not talking about that at this point. Okay, so my main point is to remind you that when we talk about the Arab vote in Israel, is the vote of 20% of the population. 20% is a lot, it's 1 out of 5. Okay, let's continue. Now, so what happened in the last election? I'm calling it a soap opera, okay? And you will see in a minute. A soap opera that includes courtship, broken promises, and betrayals, okay? So what happened? All right, so these were the results. These were the results of the April 2020 elections. So now let's see how the system is supposed to work and how it actually worked. This is a year ago, April 2020. Now, I'm having two columns of parties. The parties that are pro-Bibi or pro-Netanyahu and the parties that are anti-Bibi. In the pro-Bibi column, we have the Likud, we have the ultra-Orthodox parties, that in Hebrew, that's the Haredim party with 16 seats. There are two. One is the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox party called the Shas, and the other is the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox party. Okay, and then there was Yamina, led by, which is like a right-wing party led by Naftali Bennett, a person that we will talk about quite a bit going into the current elections. Now, on the opposition, the anti-Bibi camp, we had blue and white, led by Benny Gantz. We had the merger of Labor, which is in Hebrew Mifleget Avodah, and Meretz, which is the left-wing Israeli party. We have the Arab list, which is called the Joint List, which had 15 seats. And we had the party led by Lieberman, Avigdor Lieberman, which is it is informally referred to as the Russian party, because it is the party that most Russian immigrants into Israel vote. And it's a right-wing party, but strongly anti-Bibi. Okay, let's move on. This is getting complicated. Now, Netanyahu was indicted of corruption charges in November 2019. The elections were in April 2020. Okay, so actually this is the fourth election. All three of the past elections have been tainted by complications related to Netanyahu pretty much trying to avoid being indicted. But then finally he was indicted in November 2019. The trial began in May 2020, right after the elections, but it has since been delayed several times. Now, many observers believe that Netanyahu wanted and still wants to pass legislation aiming at granting a sitting prime minister immunity from prosecution. So this is important because many of the combinations that were successful or were not successful in trying to put together a coalition were possibly tainted by this type of considerations. Now, blue and white, at the time, a year ago, it was a united party of the opposition, of the center, led by Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz is a general, the former chief of staff of the IDF, which is Tzahal, it's the Israeli army. The other leader of blue and white was Yair Lapid, who we will hear more about him in a minute. He agreed to let Gantz be the single leader in order to present a united front. So the opposition to Netanyahu from the center was at its best during the last election, okay? And something happened, which we will see in a minute. The opposition is not united for these elections. Okay, so this is Yair Lapid, and he said, okay, fine, I will let Gantz be the leader. So what happened? If you look at the numbers, there were enough numbers in the anti-Bibi camp a year ago to form a government, because you need to have at least 61 votes. So let's count. Blue and white had 33. The combination of Labor and Meretz plus one more, they had 7. The Joint List, which is the Arab party, had 15, which is huge. How come? Because before this election, the Joint List was 3 or 4 different smaller parties, and they joined forces under a leadership of a fairly charismatic and moderate leader called Ayman Odeh. So they were at their best, at the top of their game a year ago. Not so now. We'll get to that. And this is Lieberman, a right-wing party, the Russian party called Israel Beiteinu, but he was strongly anti-Netanyahu. So there were enough votes in order to form a coalition without Netanyahu. So what happened? Well, first of all, Lieberman said, being a right-winger, that he does not want to enter into a coalition with the Arab parties. So there has been, unfortunately, from my perspective, a tradition in Israel of not treating the Arab parties as equal. So like saying, well, okay, yeah, technically they are citizens and technically they have a right to vote, but you know, they are not Jewish parties. I don't know. So that has been an unfortunate tendency in Israeli politics, from my perspective. So Lieberman said, I'm not so sure that I want to join the coalition. But also from within Blue and White, you heard noises like that, to such an extent that at some point, two members of Blue and White said, no, we are not, we are definitely, we'd rather support Netanyahu than enter into a coalition with the support of the Arab parties. So the whole possibility, finally, of the opposition to replace Netanyahu, they were very, very close last time, a year ago, but it fell apart. Okay, now, as you can see from the map, Netanyahu and its allies did not have enough, they couldn't reach the 61 votes because they had 36 for the Likud. Now the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim parties, they are very close to the Likud. So they said, no, we are staying with you no matter what. So that's 52. And Yamina, which is a right-wing party that was also close to Netanyahu, was 6, but that's 58. That was not enough. So the opposition could not form a party, a coalition, and the right under Netanyahu also could not form a coalition. So Netanyahu, who is a very creative politician and he knows every trick of the trade, made the following offer. Let me go back to the previous slide. He extended, this is during the time of the early days of the Corona pandemic. And he said, no, this is a national emergency. We have to start united. We need the national unity government. So let's join forces. I know we come from different areas, but let's join forces. So he invited the opposition to join forces into a national unity government. So you have to understand that Blue and White had campaigned on a very strong principle that no matter what, Gantz was not going to join forces with Netanyahu and enter a Netanyahu-led government. But he was seduced and he was convinced. This is where the soap opera starts. He said, no, let's have a rotation. Let's have a joint turns. Let's take turns being prime minister. Netanyahu, will go first, but of course, after a year and a half, you will go second. Okay, so Netanyahu promised Gantz to have a rotation of the prime minister after a year and a half. And Gantz was seduced. So he said, okay, fine, I'll do it. As a result of Gantz agreeing to enter into a coalition with Netanyahu, the Blue and White partnership between the part of the party following Gantz and the part of the party following Yair Lapid, remember? That fell apart. So Netanyahu, by inviting Blue and White to join the government, was able to destroy Blue and White, because from a very strong party with 33 seats in the Knesset, it started falling into various pieces. Uh, Labor, the Labor Meretz coalition of 7 also fell apart, with a few members of parliament from Labor agreeing to join the Netanyahu government, and a couple and Meretz saying, no, we're staying out. So as a result of that, we had in the coalition, this is a year ago, I remind you, we had a government of 67 with Likud, the leftover of blue and white led by Gantz, that's only 12 out of the 33, with 21 members of blue and white under the leadership of Yair Lapid staying in the opposition, 3 members of Labor, 2 or 3 members of Labor, and one Knesset member from Labor that decided to stay in the opposition. Her name is Merav Michaeli, and we'll hear more about her in a minute because she became the current leader of Labor, and the Haredim. So that is the ruling coalition today, okay? And the rest became in the opposition. And by the way, Yamina, which was supposed to be in the coalition, they could never reach an agreement with Netanyahu, and they were also part of the opposition, even though they are a right-wing party. So, so what happened? So we had the elections. We have the National Unity Government, the elections in April, the National Unity Government in May. So Bibi promised Gantz a rotation as prime minister effective October 2021. That's a year and a half later. But there was a loophole. Before we talk about the loophole, let me tell you that everybody in Israel, almost everybody, was saying there is no way that Netanyahu is going to keep his promise to have a rotation. This is all a trick. One way or another, Netanyahu is going to find a way not to live up to his promise to have a rotation. And sure enough, that's what happened. The loophole was a technicality which we're not going to get into, approval of the national budget. It turns out that there is a feature of the political system that if a national budget is not approved by a certain date, whatever government is in place needs to be disbanded. So Netanyahu engineered a conflict with Gantz regarding whether there is a 1-year budget or a 2-year budget that was promised, was not promised, and that was the mechanism that Netanyahu used in order to disband the current government and call for new elections. All of this during a time of crisis in Israel because of the pandemic. So a very complicated period. And the last thing that anybody in Israel wanted was a new election, the current election, the election number 4. Okay, so now we have election number 4 scheduled for next week. So now we take a deep breath and we say, all right, okay, election number 4. So what is the configuration of parties? The right, the left, the coalition, what's likely to happen? And now you will see that the panorama is quite different. It's quite different. A lot of things change. I want to, when I describe the likely outcomes of the elections, I'm going to use the expected number of seats that each party is expected to get based on recent polls, but these numbers are changing by the date, so they are not precise number, but they are in the ballpark. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what is new in the last few months going into the new election, because you more or less understood what happened in the April 2020 elections. So what happened to Likud? Now, this is a major development. Within Likud, Netanyahu for years has been able to remain the undisputed leader of the party, suppressing any internal challenges to his leadership. Now, one Likud politician was Gidon Saar. Gidon Saar was a Likud politician that was unhappy with the way things were going in the Likud, So he finally made the move a few months ago to leave Likud and to start a new party, more or less with the same ideas as Likud. So Gidon Saar is a right-wing politician, just like Netanyahu, but he's not tainted by any judicial procedures, and he wants to be a more straightforward, old-fashioned politician. So he's saying, yes, these are my ideas, they are right-wing ideas, but I don't want to engage in certain practices that Netanyahu has engaged in, like being very divisive and utilizing dirty tricks for this and for that. So I'm going to be a straightforward right-wing politician. And right now he's expected to get 9 seats. In the early days, when he came out with his new party, he was polling at 18 or 20 seats. Now he has been deflated a little bit, but still 9 seats is a lot. So Netanyahu is expected to get about 29 or 30 seats. These are all projections in the next elections. And Gidon Saar, his new party is called New Hope. He's expected to get 9 seats. So what else has happened since then? I told you already that Blue and White pretty much was destroyed. The party still exists under the leadership of Benny Gantz, but it's barely making it with expected 4 seats. Now, reminder, you know what happens if they get less than 4 seats, right? Less than 4 seats is 0 because of the threshold of the 3% threshold. And Yesh Atid, which is the other half of Blue and White, is doing pretty well. Is now the leading party in the opposition under the leadership of Yair Lapid, polling at around 20 seats. Okay, what else is new in 2021? Wait, this one. Remember the joint list that I said that was finally united with an impressive performance of 15 seats a year ago? Well, that union is falling apart, especially because a component of the joint list was a party called RAM. These are both Arab parties under the leadership of Mansour Abbas, which had decided to split from the joint list, and Ram is doing all sorts of crazy things. He's talking to the Likud as being a potential partner. He's trying to talk to both sides. What happened to Yamina? Yamina is the right-wing party left by Naftali Bennett. So Yamina is doing well at 11 expected seats. And a splinter from Yamina is the religious Zionist party under the leadership of Bezalel Smotrich, which has become very controversial because it has welcomed another politician that is considered very, very right-wing. It's considered far-right in Israel with some points of view that are viewed as being outright racist. So that has been quite controversial. And so that's a party that is now still around. And Labor and Meretz are not running together. Labor is expected to make 6 seats, and Meretz is expected to barely make it to 4 seats. Okay, so when we tally the pro-Bibi and the anti-Bibi camp, we have the following picture. So this is a summary of the outlook for the elections next week. On the pro-Bibi camp, we have Likud at around 29 or 30. We have the Haredim being stable with 13. And we have the far-right party, the religious Zionism with 5. And that is like 47. On the anti-Bibi camp, we have Yesh Atid, we have Gidon Saar, we have the joint list, we have Lieberman with the Russian party, we have the Labor, we have Meretz, and we have whatever is left of Blue and White, totaling 58. You need 61. 58 is close, but not enough. And then we have two undecided politicians. Yamina, led by Naftali Bennett, who is polling at 11. He has said that, I don't know, I may support Netanyahu or I may not support Netanyahu. We will see. And then the Ram, which is the Arab politician that split from the joint list. So these undecided are going to determine what will happen next week. So wherever Naftali Bennett from Yamina decides to go, it will determine whether Netanyahu has or does not have enough support to form a government. Now, I want to point your attention to the yellow markings. The yellow markings are the four parties that are borderline, and they may not make it. They may not pass the threshold. So if they don't pass the threshold, everything changes because those votes get wasted, and the votes get reassigned to everybody else. So notice that Meretz may not make it, Benny Gantz may not make it, Ram, the Arab party, may not make it, and also the religious, the ultra-right party may not make it. So that's complicated enough, huh? So quickly, because we are running out of time, we have three possible scenarios. Scenario number one, the dream outcome for Netanyahu would be that Bennett decides to go with the right. So it will be a Likud, Haredim, extreme right, and Bennett. That is a dream outcome because it will be a pure right-wing, ultra-Orthodox coalition that will most likely support all sorts of steps. First of all, they will support some kind of judicial manipulation so that Netanyahu doesn't have to face trial anytime soon. And then in terms of domestic policies, it will support probably steps that will be problematic for many Israelis and also problematic from a US perspective, such as intensification of the settlements or annexation of the West Bank or so on. Scenario number two, the dream outcome for the anti-Bibi camp, that Bennett joins the anti-Bibi camp, and it's not clear who will be the prime minister. It could be Bennett, it could be Saar, or maybe it could be Lapid. Maybe there will be a rotation among them. That's not clear. And scenario number three is the nightmare scenario for everybody else except for Bibi, which is that there is no viable coalition. We are stuck once again, just like in the previous three elections, and there is a call for fifth election 6 months later. So, whew. Okay, so let's go back to your feelings. I am betting that this is your reaction now. or this, oi. Okay, so let me make a summary statement, because remember how I started emphasizing the achievements that Israel has made as a country in the last few decades. So this is my editorial. These are my summary. It is incredible that a country with so many achievements in so many fields is stuck with such a dysfunctional political system. So this is where I take a break. I was going to start with the Middle East, but I'm running out of time. So let me take a break. Let me stop the screen sharing and open the floor for some comments right now. Rabbi, you want to say a few words?
Yes, I want. And you know what? I don't want to kill your activity about Middle East today. Let's commit ourselves. In 2 weeks, I will ask you another Mifgash for Middle East. Let's continue with the Israel politics the next 10, 15 minutes. And then in 2-3 weeks, I will call you, beg you, and you will say yes in all the 17 language that you speak.
Thank you, Rabbi. No.
Okay, so let's go with the system.
Yeah, okay, so I'm ready to stop now my frontal presentation and open the floor to questions, comments.
Beautiful.
So, Rabbi, you go first. What do you think about the political landscape that I painted?
No, I just wanted to mention something that looks very, 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 very unfair for the Israeli voters, the ones that vote. Why Bennett will not tell me who he will join and he still wants my vote? You understand?
Yeah.
So expand on that, please.
Well, it's pretty much it's a form of Middle East bargaining. Okay, it's to increase his price. Actually, there's something that I didn't tell you. I didn't tell you what is the likelihood of each of the three scenarios, in my opinion. Remember the dream scenario for Netanyahu? Actually, the dream scenario for Netanyahu is the most likely scenario. So everybody is really expecting for Bennett to really join Netanyahu. And the reason that he's not announcing that now is that he wants to increase his price. Okay, it's a way of starting the bargaining with Netanyahu so that a day after the election results are announced, Bennett will have a lot of bargaining power with Netanyahu, telling him, well, you know, I have alternatives. I could join the opposition. What are you offering me? So that is the way the system works.
And now, give us a little bit of information. How can an Arab candidate say, I may join Netanyahu, and be able to come to his kfar, to his village in peace?
Okay, it's a very good question, but there is a very easy answer that makes sense. Most Arab voters are desperate about local issues. Remember the expression in the US that all politics is local. That is very true for Arab voters in Israel, for Israeli citizens that live in Arab towns and Arab villages. Why? Why are they desperate about local issues? Because they have a lot of municipal problems. There is a lot of crime and too many weapons, and they're not happy with the priority that the police and the authorities are giving to the Arab citizens and to the Arab towns. So the Arab citizens want to be heard, want to be taken more seriously. Forget about the Palestinian issue and the two-state solution. They don't care about that anymore. They want improvements in their daily lives. So there is an Arab politician that is saying, we will support whatever party from the right or from the left or from the center in Israel that promises to give us goodies, that promises to improve our conditions. And Netanyahu is not playing that game. Netanyahu is approaching the Arab parties and saying, vote Likud, or dealing with politicians that are talking to the Likud as a way of saying your daily lives can improve. So that is the explanation. Now, he's also playing games. His name is Mansour Abbas. He's playing games because one day he says he may support Netanyahu, and the next day he says, well, of course, I'm not going to support Netanyahu. I'm not sure who I'm going to support. So that's why he's on the undecided column. Okay, we're ready to take more questions, either in the chat or anywhere else. Raise your hand, open your microphone, and we're ready.
Hugo, Dora has a question for you.
Okay, Dora.
Okay, do you think that Netanyahu being so, I mean, he is a manipulator. He's a manipulator, and he has done it all the time. So you think he's going to win? I mean, like promising things for, for voters, and then, I think he's going to do it.
Okay.
What do you think?
Characterizing Netanyahu as a manipulator is a characterization that very few people, including Netanyahu supporters, would object to. Okay, is he going to get away with it? The way things are looking, actually, I heard an Israeli commentator earlier today make the following analogy. Remember how during the American elections, when we analyzed the Electoral College and the different states, and we're talking about there is a path to victory that goes through Georgia and Indiana and without Texas, but with California, right? Like a path to victory, and there are different paths to victory for the Democrats or for the Republicans. Okay, so we can talk about the various paths to victory that Netanyahu has. For example, if enough parties from the center or one or more parties from the center do not make the cutoff, the threshold, then that will benefit Netanyahu. Or if he, I didn't even mention some emergency solutions that Netanyahu can have. Remember how half an hour ago I said that a year ago from Blue and White, two politicians from Blue and White said, no, we're not going to join forces with the Arab parties and we would rather support Netanyahu. That wasn't a coincidence. They were enticed to do that, to take that attitude by the Likud, by Netanyahu. So that's called fishing for defectors, fishing for defectors. So he's capable of doing the same thing the day after the elections next week, fishing from defectors from some of the parties that are officially in the anti-Bibi camp. So he's a very, very skilled politician. And,
yes, that's what I meant, that he's very skilled.
So the chances as of today, the chances are that he will get away with it. Now, the problem is, let me make one more comment. The problem is that if he has a safe coalition of right-wing and ultra-Orthodox parties, we don't know how far he will go, because you have to worry about Biden and you have to worry about what the US administration will tolerate. Because I didn't have a chance to talk about Biden because that was in the second part of my presentation about the Middle East, but let me give you a preview. Biden is in a mood of putting limits to the various US allies or adversaries that the limits were not clear under the Trump administration. Let me say a few more words about that, okay? Under the Trump administration, Bibi could do whatever he wanted, and Trump would say, sure. And MBS in Saudi Arabia could do whatever he wanted, and Trump would say, sure, that's okay with me. And Putin, it's not exactly that he could do whatever he wanted, but Trump had a strange attitude towards putting a limit to what Putin was or was not doing, okay? So the Biden administration, in my opinion, is going to put some limits on what Israel can get away with, or what Netanyahu can get away with, what Saudi Arabia can get away with, what Putin can get away with. So if there is a safe right-wing extremist government in Israel, it's problematic, you know, the type of complication that could occur with the US administration. We have more to say about that, but this is my preview. Wait a minute, let me go to the
Dr.
chat.
Dr. Erwin, I will read for you the 3 questions. Okay. Answer 1 minute for each question, and Shalom Aleichem.
Okay.
By the way, this was absolutely brilliant. So first question, how is COVID influencing the election? Prime Minister Netanyahu response helped him? This is question 1. Question 2, can you expand on the confrontation between the Haredim and the possible result of that? 3, what are the chances of 5th election? First, about COVID and Netanyahu.
Okay. As of 3 weeks ago, only 3 weeks ago, COVID was hurting Netanyahu because the only very successful component of the COVID situation that has helped Netanyahu and is helping him a lot now is the successful vaccination strategy. Netanyahu handles the vaccination strategy very, very well. Basically, he overpaid for the vaccines. He overpaid. He said to Pfizer, whatever, we'll give you a premium, just give me more. That was brilliant. That was brilliant. By the way, the European Union underpaid for the vaccine and they got pushed down to the bottom of the list. And also he offered Pfizer access to the data of the whole medical history of all the people in Israel, which is very problematic from the privacy point of view, but he said, no problem. You can have full access to the data to be able to do research in terms of the possible side effects. And so he was able to put a very, very successful strategy of getting plenty of vaccines for the Israeli population, and he's getting credit for that. But there were numerous mistakes in the handling of the pandemic before that, okay? Israel had 6,000 dead people. And even though at the beginning Israel was doing very well, there were a lot of missteps in the handling of the pandemic, and that was hurting Netanyahu up until 3 weeks ago. But now the Israeli economy is opening up because most people are vaccinated. So now he's getting credit for that. So the net effect probably is that every day that goes by, the COVID situation is helping Netanyahu.
Beautiful. What about, can you expand on the confrontation between and the Haredim and the possible result of that?
I don't expect too many complications with that. Okay, the Haredim are solidly in the Netanyahu camp, and only if there is a surprise next week, and there is a very, very likely outcome that somebody like Bennett or Gideon Sa'ar will put together a government, we could begin to see something that we have not seen in recent years, which is defections from the pro-Bibi camp. So remember, the Haredi parties throughout the existence of Israel, they have had a very simple principle, political principle, which is go with the party that is running the show and is able to give them generous budgets, regardless of who they are. In recent years, it has been with the right, but the Haredim has extensive dealings with Mapai and the Labour Party in order to get.
So you cannot say it, but I can. What you're telling me is they don't have principles, okay? Now, the last
That's one way of looking at it, yes.
I know. The last question will be, what are the chances of a fifth election soon?
Okay, actually, in the three scenarios that I painted, the most likely scenario is an outright narrow government, right-wing government run by Netanyahu. That scenario has a 40 or 50% likelihood. Okay. The maybe 30% likelihood of a fifth election, 30% and 20% likelihood of an anti-Bibi coalition, which will be very right-wing. The anti-Bibi coalition will also be very right-wing. Okay, so whoever is a supportive of the center left, I do not have any good news for you. Okay, are we out of time? You want?
Yes.
Okay.
We are out of time, but not out of interest. So I want to thank you for a brilliant, look, everybody is applauding. And amazing. I had expectation, but you surpassed them all. And I will ask you, please, if you can, in a couple of weeks, enlighten us on the Middle East in general, okay?
Let's do it. Let's do it. And we'll be able to talk about, okay, we will cheat because we'll be able, it will be mostly about the Middle East, but we'll be able to analyze a little bit of the outcome of this.
That's beautiful. So I take you by the word. Thank you, doctor. Gracias. And everybody is invited Monday night at 6 p.m., a virtual tour to the Holocaust, new brand Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires. The activity.
Rabbi, the link is, Matt put the link in the chat. Whoever wants it, they can click on the link and register today.
This is an amazing, Victoria, it's amazing. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi, for the invitation. I enjoy doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Hugo. Bye, everybody.
Okay,
Hugo, I need you to download the recording for me and email.
Okay, I can do that.
Thank you, Hugo.
Hugo, it was amazing. It was amazing. Now I can understand. Thank you, Hugo.
Very question. Yeah. Prepare more questions for next time.
Hugo, you'll do that for me. You'll send me the link to the recording and I'll prepare a YouTube link for you.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
We'll do.
Oh, it was wonderful.
Hugo, thank you. It was wonderful.
It was.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining.
Okay. Okay, are they going to end?
Marla,
Yes, I'm ending it right now. I'm ending it right now.
Marla, to download the recording, I can do it after I leave.
Yes, you can do it tomorrow if you want. And then I'll upload it to YouTube. Hugo. No problem. Goodbye, everybody. I'm ending the call.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
A beautiful year. Love it.